But we got Indiana, Maryland prediction time. We're going to be previewing and predicting this game. It's a noon game on Saturday. And I will have to preface that the weather is a big deal. The weather is 110% a big deal for this game. Because you're talking about the fact that Hurricane Helene might end up going up into the middle of the U.S. and it might have some rain. So that's definitely something to watch. I think it's a good sign for Indiana that they can run the football. So if things are rough through the air, you can't throw the ball, Indiana can run. Maryland's more of a passing team too, so it might actually, in a way, benefit Indiana if the weather's bad. But I would prefer the weather to be good, so there's fans there, possibly a sellout crowd, and Indiana can run their whole offense. But that's something that we'll have to monitor when it comes to that department. But we already got some predictions in chat. I haven't even got to it yet. Keep chopping those. It's Indiana 54, Maryland 17. If that happens, Indiana's definitely ranked. And I think people will really believe him. Jason says Maryland 28, Indiana 17. We don't like seeing that, Jason. We don't like seeing that. But you never know. Maryland's not a bad team. But Indiana, they're favored by 7 at home. Usually the home spread's by 3. So we'll see. Vandy Danny says Saturday the Hurricane will only be in Georgia and the Carolinas. I've seen that, but I've also seen where like the rain like will be above it, could cause maybe a bit of wind, some rain. It's just something to watch. Might not even be a problem. Michael Wheatley, he's going with his Terps 31-24. Jim saying 28-17 IU. But we got to look at Maryland's team though, because how good are they? And the players they have is going to determine this game just as much as Indiana's players. How a game works. Both teams and their players, and obviously their coach as well, Mike Locksley. I think he's a solid coach. I don't think he's a fantastic coach, but he's not doing too bad. I think his record's under 500, but Maryland's not an easy place to win at. So give him some slack. Billy Edwards, 102 of 136, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, 2 picks. And Billy Edwards is somebody Curt Cignetti knows. He actually recruited him to James Madison, but he didn't go to James Madison. He went to Wake Forest. Then he ended up going to Maryland. But Billy Edwards, though, I mean, this guy could not throw the ball to save his life a couple years ago. He's a lot better now. He actually could throw the ball. So Billy Edwards, he's not just a runner. Indiana's going to have to watch out for that. And that's something if it's raining, he can use his legs. So he's not a slouch. He's not somebody that Indiana could just overlook because he has more passing yards than Rourke does. So he can play. He's gotten a whole lot better. He's not someone to overlook at all, and Curt Cignetti has said that. Like, Indiana's defense needs to keep their eyes on Billy Edwards because he is a solid quarterback. Maryland's run game hasn't been elite, but Roman Hemby, he was with the program last year. He has 201 rushing yards. He's got 2 touchdowns. But you can see, like, Maryland doesn't have as many rushing touchdowns as Indiana does. And yeah, Maryland has had 2, I guess you would say tougher games. They played Virginia, they played Michigan State, whereas Indiana's only had UCLA. So Indiana's numbers are a bit inflated, but you can tell that Maryland's not a great running team. They're not a great rushing attack. They have some decent players, but their O-line might not be one of the best in college football. It's not one of the better ones in the Big Ten. So we'll have to see how Indiana's D-line affects Maryland's run game. But I really believe, like, if Indiana can, for the most part, shut down the run game for Maryland, that will really help because it puts more pressure on Edwards. That's why with Rourke, it's been great for Indiana that he can have that rushing attack next to him, those 4 running backs that take pressure off of him. If you can run and pass, makes it life a lot easier on the quarterback. So we'll have to watch there. But the key player for Maryland is Ty Felton. I already mentioned him because Ty Felton, look at his stats, 604 yards in 4 games, which is unreal. We're talking about a stat line that a lot of receivers only achieve at the end of the season. 41 receptions, 604 yards, and he also has 5 touchdowns. So Ty Felton, he's a problem. Ty Felton is a really, really good player. But the thing is, though, is that he's by far their best receiver. So if Indiana can shut him down, you do have Caden Prather. He was a transfer from West Virginia. He's not a bad player. 203 receiving yards. He's not bad. He's a good secondary option. And they got a tight end, Dylan Wade, 168 yards, but then nothing after that. So all Indiana has to do is keep their eyes on Felton, keep their eyes on him. And you can shut him, or not really shut him down, but limit him. Like if they can hold him to like 80 receiving yards instead of like what he's been getting, like 160 yards a game, that will be big for Indiana. Cannot let Ty Felton go off for a big game. And I think Indiana's corners, Sean Asbury, D'Angelo Pons, they're good enough to limit him. Not good enough to stop him, but if they can limit him, that will really help Indiana because they just don't have a lot of other great wide receivers. And then looking at their defense, they definitely do not have as many standout guys as Indiana does, especially in the tackles department. Dante Trader, Ruben Hippolyte, two really solid players when it comes to the linebacker and defensive back spot. D-line, I mean, they got some good players. I'm not discrediting Maryland. Like, they have a decent defense, but they did give up 20 to Villanova, which I know Indiana gave up 14 to Charlotte, but Villanova's worse than Charlotte. They did hold Virginia to 13. That's pretty good. Virginia's not a great team, though. So I think Maryland, like, defense-wise, they're not bad. They have some players. They don't really have any standout players. They have a few guys I recognize. They're not bad. So for Indiana, especially, I think Maryland's one of their bigger weaknesses is, like, the secondary. That's where Indiana might be able to expose them with the passing game, especially if the weather's good. That's why I'm really keen on that weather. It's got to be good. You do not want to have, poor weather in this game because then Indiana can really air it out on them. I think Maryland's defensive, secondary, defensive backs are a little bit weaker. So that's a big key to watch. But looking at some more of the comments, John Jacobs says, I almost said Josh Jacobs. John Jacobs giving up 20 to Villanova is like me giving up 20 to my grandmother. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you probably can put up more points. I mean, maybe your grandmother can keep up. We'll see. You never know. But that's funny. Michael Wheatley says trash touchdowns at the end. They played third string. Well, that's fair. I will say that. I do notice in a lot of games like that, you usually sometimes give up garbage touchdowns. But that's one thing Indiana has been doing with Cignetti. Like, they have been shutting down, teams at the end. Like, they have not been letting them score garbage touchdowns for the most part. Jay says Indiana won't be able to cover Felton. He's like the main player that I'm worried about. Like, for Maryland. Felton is good. I mean, he's probably going to be in the NFL, like, no doubt. He's a really good receiver. Dave Valensky says 35-28 Indiana. Okay, so what is my final prediction for this game? I went back and forth a little bit because I know Maryland has given Indiana some troubles recently, but that was under Tom Allen. They've won the last 3 games against Indiana. But to be fair, they couldn't beat Indiana before that. Indiana was actually dominating Maryland for the most part, even though the games were very close earlier in the Tom Allen era and the Kevin Wilson era. And toward the tail end of the Tom Allen era, everybody was dominating Indiana because they were not good. So that was a big problem there. But Maryland, Indiana, usually competitive games. Maryland's won the last 3, but Indiana's a different team now. They have too much confidence. Cignetti, he's going to get them ready to play. He's not going to let them overlook Maryland because Maryland, why would you overlook them? They beat you the last 3 times. They're a solid team. They got quality players. Loxley's a solid coach, but it's at Indiana. I think the crowd's going to be really good in this game. The first time Indiana has a legit crowd. And if the weather is good, Indiana will be able to throw the ball. So will Maryland. But I do think Indiana is going to beat Maryland 31-20. Maybe I'm a little bullish on Indiana, but I've seen some great things from Indiana football this season. So much so, more than Maryland, that I believe Indiana wins this game. Could Maryland win? Absolutely. And if they did, it wouldn't shock me. And would it ruin Indiana's season if they lost? No, it would not. They could still make a bowl game, achieve all that they want to achieve, for Indiana fans anyway. I mean, the dream of making the playoff and all that kind of stuff would die, which some people have right now for Indiana, which is insane that we're even mentioning it, and it's a possibility. I'm nowhere near that. They got to win these games first. Beat Maryland, beat Northwestern. If you beat Nebraska, then we'll talk a little bit about playoff, but we're not there. So if Indiana loses this game, no, it won't wreck their season. They can still make a bowl game, still win 6-7 games. But I think this is a big game for Indiana because I believe that even though the UCLA game opened some people's eyes, I believe a game like this will show people it's not a fluke. They're not messing around. Like Indiana, they can beat comparable teams because Maryland's a comparable team to Indiana. They've always been a comparable team to each other. There's never really been a point in the last 15 years where either program's been like that far ahead or behind one another. They're very similar programs. I mean, they actually even have similar fan size. You look at like social media, like they're 2 teams that have like similar fan interests. They're more basketball schools. Maryland's more of a basketball school. Indiana definitely is. And, they're not great in football. Maryland's usually better than Indiana, but still, like they're pretty similar to one another. And I think Indiana's on a higher trajectory right now than Maryland. Billy Edwards, solid quarterback. Ty Felton, great receiver. They don't have a whole lot else. Indiana, I can list tons of players. D'Angelo Pons, Mikel Kamara, Curtis Rourke, all the running backs, all the receivers. Like to me, they have more oomph to their team, more dynamic players, and they got the better coach. And a lot of times when you got the better coach, and I know some people would say it's too premature to say that, but Cignetti, he's proven it wherever he's been. Cignetti is, to me, he's a better coach than Locksley. Indiana, I think, has a slightly better team than Maryland, and I think that will result in a win.